coming on a night. Ann is off next week, so we thought since everyone had to come to City Hall for Committee of the Whole anyway, that we could knock this meeting out and kind of stay sort of on our normal schedule. So thank you for that. Item number 1 on our agenda is minutes of the previous meeting from 8/10 of 21, copies of which are in our packets. Any revisions to the minutes necessary? If not, I'll take a motion to approve the minutes. Motion by Herbst. Is there a second? Second by Martins. Further discussion? Seeing none, members in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? None are opposed. The minutes are approved. Item number 2 is discussion and possible action regarding the First Amendment to the agreement between the City of Wausau and the Wausau Cemetery Association regarding the lease of a snow disposal site. And you may recall, periodically we renew this contract where DPW is able to dispose of snow that it has to plow and truck out of areas behind the Pine Grove Cemetery. And this facilitates that arrangement. And it looks like it's time to renew that again. A copy of the agreement is in the packets. Anything out of the ordinary on this one, Marion? It didn't look like there was. There's no changes really for.
No, I think Ann's articulated all of her.
Yeah, she has a staff memo with it, so. Anybody have questions on it? Go ahead, Sarah.
So on the actual contract on page 1, I guess paragraph or section 2, under the therefore, the parties here to agree. I guess I understand the rental agreement, but I'm not sure why the CPI is kept at no less than 3%. I mean, over the last decade, it's only gone above 3% once. So can it just be the consumer price index? Can we strike that last line in the agreement?
I think, Ann, have you been having conversations with the cemetery?
Yeah, we'll bring up the city attorney and she can answer that.
Yes, and I told them they didn't need to appear tonight, so I knew this might happen. Both Rob Reinertson, the attorney for the Wausau Cemetery Association, and Gary Gisselman actually asked me if they needed to appear tonight. So what they want to do is renew this agreement for another 5-year period, and then there will be another 5-year period after that. And as it shows in the amendment, the easement agreement was, that provision was satisfied, so we're removing that. The date is amended to 2021 for the next term, and the one-time payment of $15,000 in paragraph 3 was paid. So you want to remove, Sarah, the last sentence in number 2, paragraph 2, the annual rent increase will not be less than 3%?
Correct. I guess I just wondered why the 3% was decided upon. I mean, just keeping up with the CPI or consumer price index seems fair. And especially since, like, I mean, granted, I looked it up, and next year it's potentially going to go up by, I think, 4.5% to 4.8%. But in the past decade, it's hovered around 2%. So I guess I wondered why 3% was chosen.
I don't know how the original agreement was negotiated.
So I'm wondering if we can just strike that and just keep it with the CPI. It keeps it pretty simple then in adjusting the rent.
Well, that seems fair to them. I mean,
month.
we're paying them the rent.
Yeah.
So if it's 2%, it's 2%. This just says,
It can't go below 3.
right, so 3% or CPI, whichever's higher.
Okay, so can we just do CPI and just not do either
If they
or?
agree to that, if that's your motion to approve it that way with that last sentence stricken in paragraph 2, I can take it back to them. I mean, we have until October if we need to bring it back.
Sure. So would you want to move then to approve the agreement with the amendment that the last line of item 2 be stricken to remove the 3%?
The minimum of 3% CPI adjustment, yes.
Okay, and then Ann can confer with them about that, and if it's not agreeable for some reason, she could bring it back.
I mean, it still keeps the CPI, it's just,
Right.
there's no minimum
Right.
threshold.
Okay. So then we have a motion to approve the contract with Sarah's amendment. Is there a second? Second by Ryan. Further discussion or questions? Seeing none, members in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? None are opposed. That item carries then.
All right, then I think I'll go back to them and make sure I have an agreement before advancing it to the next council meeting.
Sure.
And then we can make that note for the council meeting that
Is
they
it
agreed to the amendment that you
planned, is it
proposed.
planned for next week's council or the 28th?
No, I don't think we necessarily had it on any particular agenda, just because it doesn't expire till October 19th.
Okay, well,
So-
maybe let's hold it to the 28th so that you have time to do that. And then if we have to.
Oh, definitely. It won't be
Cons-
before, it won't be for next Tuesday. Oh, no,
Okay.
no, no,
Okay.
no.
All right.
Because all that stuff had to be in today, so,
Okay, that's what I was thinking, just so you have time to do it, and if you have to come back to us.
no, that sounds perfect.
Okay.
All right,
perfect.
thank
All right,
you.
Thanks. Then item number 3 is presentation of 2020 financial results, and Mary Ann's got a PowerPoint for us. Little recap of last year.
Yeah. So you'll just follow along. Okay. So this is the same format that we've used in prior years, so it's going to look familiar. I just wanted to kind of give you a historical review of our results since 2009. You can see from 2009 to 2014, we had a relatively break-even budget. So over that 6-year period of time, we had a net loss or a reduction in our fund balance of about $166,000. Subsequent to that, from 2015 to 2020, we actually have experienced profits each year. And some of them, they've been relatively healthy profits. So our net gain to our fund balance is $5.2 million during that 5-year period of time. So, we've had some very good years. Obviously, that profit has resulted in growth in our fund balance over time. You can see back in 2009, our total fund balance was $6 million. At the end of 2020, our total fund balance is now up to $14,600,000. Some of that is not available for future expenditure because it's committed. So as we know, our tax increment districts, for example, will generally function in a deficit situation, and then the general fund finances that until their increment grows to the point where they get out of that deficit. So you can see at the end of this year, TIDs 3, 7, 9, and 12 were utilizing advances from the general fund, and that shows up in that blue section. And then we also have things like inventory that we've purchased that is an asset, but it's not a cash asset that we could use for a future budget. We have contingency of $163,000, and then years ago, the council authorized allocating $500,000 and kind of loaning it to the commercial rehab activity. And then we have carryover funding of $73,000. So when we take all of those, what we'll call non-spendable or committed items out, you can see that still our fund balance has grown. Our uncommitted, unassigned fund balance back in 2016 was $5.7 million, and we are now up to $10.1 million. Again, kind of going over our contingency, we haven't drawn on contingency on a regular basis, and we really have not been replenishing it either, so it's hovered at around $163,000 for many years now. Again, kind of looking at the advances we talked about earlier, the advances to the TIDs when they're in their deficit situation, just kind of showing what the impact has been to the general fund. And you can see that that's remained while the balance has changed from district to district. You can see that the total commitment that the general fund has been financing has stayed, in that $4 million to, $3 million range. It looks like the highest point was back in 2014 at just under 3.9 million. We're at 3.3 this year, and it was at 2.9 in 2019. When we look at where our general fund profit, how did we generate that profit, you can see that the 2020 budget, we expected 35 million in revenues in the general fund. We actually experienced 36,400,000, which is a $1.3 million increase. One large positive variance was in the intergovernmental grants of about 700,000, and that was our COVID money from the state. Another area that we experienced positive revenues was in our miscellaneous revenue. If you recall, accounting principles require us to adjust our interest income and adjust our investments to market, and because interest rates were declining, our investments, because their interest that they were getting was higher than market, drove increase in the value of those investments, and that is recorded through interest income. So our interest income was high in 2020 as well, but a $1.3 million positive variance. When we look at how we spent our property taxes from 2019 to 2020, you can see that the majority of our increased allocation, so we increased our levy $1,035,000 from 2019 to 2020, and the general fund benefited from most of that increase at $630,000, and the transit utility just under $300,000, and the rest of the funds received very little extra funds. When we look at our expenses, our general fund expenses were under our budget by $519,000. We did experience a deficit in the public safety, and that was in the salaries line item. Again, you know, we don't budget for sick leave payouts because majority of the time the vacancies offset that, but when timing of sick leave payouts is towards the end of the year, we don't benefit from that. So the majority of the public safety overage was in salaries. Another thing I'd point out is that our transportation and streets actually saved $429,000 due to the mild winter, and our parks, you can see, saved $488,000, again, due to the lack of the pools being open and a lot of the activities that they would typically expend funds for didn't take place during COVID.
Mike has a question.
Oh,
Go
sure.
ahead, Mike.
I just got a quick question. You mentioned the deficit in public safety due to sick leave payouts, but wouldn't that be more of a, since that's taken out at the end of the year, wouldn't it be more of a timing issue?
Yes.
And that would be caught up in the 2021 budget?
Yes, good
As
point.
long as we don't have a big payout at the end of this year.
Right. Very good point, thank you. Overall, our salaries, you know, from all departments' perspective, budget to actual look at salaries, you can see that we actually saved about $525,000. The majority of that being in health insurance and salaries. And again, to your point, Mike, when other departments are experiencing vacancies, of course, that can offset the public safety overage as well. But just to kind of give you a snapshot of, you know, the accuracy of our budgeting, I guess, it wasn't as if we had done a poor job of budgeting.
Mary Ann, in that regard too, for overall for the whole city, you are doing, as of year end, for audit purposes, you have to go ahead and accrue that estimation for all of the payroll in all of the departments, correct?
Yes, not sick leave. Sick leave is not considered because the general fund works on a modified accrual basis.
Okay.
We accrue vacation and like comp time, but we don't accrue sick leave because that's considered more of a long-term liability, and they have to actually retire, so the funds aren't truly vested at that specific time because they might not have met their retirement obligations.
Okay, I've just worked with other organizations where the sick leave and vacation were all accrued as of year end, but again, you're not expecting it all to be paid out
Right.
at year end. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
So can you explain, I know there's an explanation, but just sort of explain the disparity between the unemployment part from the
Oh,
budget
so
to
we
actual?
don't budget for unemployment. The city is self-funded for unemployment, so if we did pay unemployment, I didn't look why we had 1,500 budgeted for unemployment. Generally, we don't budget for it because we do know, typically if we are paying unemployment to somebody, that position is going to be vacant and it's going to recover those costs. But that's what would have happened is because we're self-employed, or self-insured for unemployment, we just pay whatever the unemployment claim is. Our contractual services, just to kind of give you an idea of, in the general fund, where the majority of our contractual services are spent. Again, here, we were almost right on target. Our budget was 7.6 million, and this would be for all departments, and we spent about 7.6 million, about, looks like $5,000 maybe over. The motor pool, what we subsidize or transfer to the motor pool to fund all of our rolling stock maintenance and fuel and replacement. That's the largest component at $3 million. The second largest would be our refuse contract of $1,035,000, followed by utilities at up just under $800,000, and CCITC, they're both about $800,000. But if you compare what we spent in 2020, the 7.6, compared to the 8.3 in 2019, the majority of that difference is motor pool. Because we had such a mild winter and because our rates are based on hours of operation of equipment or miles driven, since we didn't do much plowing or snow removal, we really saved our allocations to the motor pool. In the general fund supplies, again, the budget was 1.4 million. Our 2020 expenses were 1.3 million. Just to kind of, again, give you a breakdown of the categories of spending. Again, operating supplies and postage and repairs and maintenance were the biggest ones. We saw some pretty big savings in training and travel with only $36,000 spent this year. The majority of training took place via the web. Another area of the budget is materials. Again, only $286,000 in salt. If you compare, again, in 2020, we spent $672,000 in this category. In 2019, $1.5 million, very evident of the mild winter. And then just the final category, fixed charges, insurance, things like that. You see here, looking at 2019, 2020, and 2020 budget, that it's a pretty steady expense area. And then our contributions and grants and capital outlay contributions and grants, generally that would be like bad debt expense. If we had illegal taxes to pay out, those kinds of things would take place in that category. And then the general fund did do transfers to other funds. During the year, we did some budget modifications to bolster other funds where we saw or predicted overspending. The recycling fund, which does our leaf pickup, we had some overspending. The parking utility due to the lack of revenues. Those are the main ones. Airport fund, we transferred money again, just sort of bolstering that fund. Public access was for their special equipment. CIP, I think, was to cover some street expenses. and then the central purchasing fund for some equipment. Our special revenue funds, these are funds that have funding for specific purposes. Again, when you look historically over time, you can see that, the majority of these funds are relatively stable, and really, I don't have any major areas of concern. I would point out, that the environmental cleanup fund, we are seeing a slight dip in that fund. Historically, we were receiving annual payment from our insurance company through an annuity, and that annuity has now ended. So its revenue, I guess, reserves are fixed. There's no new revenue sources to that fund. And just kind of a continuation of some of the other funds that we have. Debt service, if you recall, we try to manage our debt service so that it's not costing the taxpayers more each year. So I manage the retirements and new additions so that the levy can remain the same on an annual basis. So it's hovered around that 4 million for, 15 years, something like that. And there are years where our fund balance goes up or down to just meet small changes in the current year's debt. So some years our fund balance goes up a little bit, some years it goes down. This year, it did change by about $500,000. And we are supposed to manage that fund balance so that we're not holding too many funds on hand, because the IRS doesn't want us to hold too many funds and earn interest on them because it's related to debt service. When we look at our outstanding debt and what the impact of that is for governmental activities, so this would be non-utility debt, in 2020, we did issue debt, but we also retired debt, so our total decrease in our outstanding debt in 2020 was just under $1.8 million, and we have in 2021 $9.7 million of principal payments due, so about 9.7 due. In 2021, based on our budget, and if you recall, we already did our borrowing this summer, our outstanding debt is going to decrease another 5.2 million. So, we are definitely trending down now. Started out at about 83 million, we're now down to 76 million, and another 10.4 million will come due in 2022. So you can see that we're going to continue to trend down. From a business activity standpoint, that would be our utilities. We started out the beginning balance of 24 million. We did, if you remember, retire our revenue bond anticipation notes, but we also have our clean water and our safe drinking water. So at the end of 2020, we started out the year at 24 million. We're at 44 million for 2020. I didn't really try to predict what 2021 was going to be because it's really based on the construction draws. We all know, what our total projects were for that. So I didn't really try to estimate those. Going into the tax increment districts, we continue to see growth in our districts. And if you recall, we really only have TID 3, 8, 10, 11, and 12 that are really what I would call active districts today. And TID 3 really has mainly concluded its work besides retiring debt. And we are, doing our financial planning and evaluating TID 6 and 7, both of them, their expenditure period ended just recently. So again, just kind of giving you a 10,000 view right now, TID 3 has a deficit. We definitely believe that that deficit will be resolved before its mandated termination, and I don't foresee any big problems. Like I said, we don't have any projects scheduled for it. It's just in basically the debt retirement phase today. TID 6, its ending deficit was just a small $3,263. Again, its expenditure period ended in 2020, and it is in the retirement phase of debt, and that will conclude in 2025, I think 1 year early, if the council wants it to, end them. TID 7, this is the district that we approved increment sharing. Right now, it is in a deficit situation, but it's going to climb out of that deficit pretty quick. I'm expecting in 2022, it will actually have a small surplus to share with TID 12. TID 8, the near west side. This district, again, we haven't had a lot of expenses. We've done some recent developer agreements for housing projects. And so those developer payments will be paid out as the income is generated. Again, no big concerns as far as unexpected draws to the general fund. TID 9, this is a really small district, but we have been in a lingering deficit, and the deficit is growing slightly. And the main reason for that is, Bull Falls has not been making their loan payments. And so without that revenue source, we're struggling to get out of that deficit with the district. TID 10 is out in the business campus. It has a small surplus. We do have some projects coming up on Stewart Avenue, I think, 48th to, is that right? Yep. Is about 1.2 million in the next couple of years. We're in the engineering phase right now. So we will be using these funds in the near future, and my predictions are it will cash flow during the retirement of that debt, so that will be nice. Business campus, this is Wausau Chemical and Great Lakes Cheese. We did have a slight deficit, but I'm not predicting any issues. We should be climbing out of that deficit shortly. And then TID 12, we do have a deficit today. It's, we're just kind of starting on our project, so it's really hard to estimate because we really don't know how fast the mall is going to redevelop, but certainly that TID revenue sharing will be of great support for the district. So this is kind of a breakdown of the TID districts and how much debt they have outstanding to pay off. So like TID 9, which is the Bull Falls, you can see that even though the district performance is lagging, it has a small amount of debt, so it's not a huge financial burden for the city. And then, as I pointed out, TID 3 is in debt retirement, TID 6 is in debt retirement, and TID 7, which only has $80,000 left to retire, is also in debt retirement.
So Mary Ann?
Yeah.
With those years after the TID numbers, is that when the debt, you're anticipating the debt to be retired?
Yes.
Okay. And then would they would be eligible for closure at that time?
Yep, then the council would be able to decide whether they wanted to close the district, keep it 1 extra year for that housing stock improvement.
So I guess that's my, I'm
okay.
hoping we use that, that affordable housing extension, because especially with our new, so, yeah, just putting it
Yes.
out there. Awesome.
Yep, and usually we'll bring it to council because you have to do it the year before it would be eligible for retirement, so it gives you time to plan.
Yep, and we did take advantage of that with TID 2.
Yes.
Right, when TID 2 closed, we reclaimed that year, and I believe a lot of that was used along 3rd Street, right?
Yes.
Between
Well,
thir-
Yeah,
Between 3rd and Short, over in that.
yes.
So, yeah, I mean, we were able to make some substantial improvements by reclaiming that, but I don't think we did it on TID 5.
No, we did
Right,
not.
we let that one close.
Yes. So we do have some developer outstanding obligations, and this just kind of lists what those obligations are. The TID portion of this presentation is the same one that I give the Joint Review Board, so I just give it to you too. And then the expected TID termination dates. We are looking to amend TID 12 sometime in the future, and we'll, be presenting that. A couple of things that we'd like to talk about is to add within the half-mile boundary, street improvements, and perhaps to add project costs for the South Riverfront. Internal service funds are designed to track expenses of activity where you're charging departments for that service. So motor pool and our insurance are two big funds. The motor pool fund, just to point out, we're trying to recover the cost to purchase new rolling stock from the profit that we make and the depreciation, because we charge depreciation to the fund. It's an expense, so it reduces your profit, but it's not a cash expense. So you can tell or see here that we had a profit in the motor pool of about $185,000. Our depreciation was just about $1 million. So we had about $1.2 million of, new cash to buy rolling stock. So 1.2, but we purchased equipment of 1.9. So as a result, our net cash position went down. We had about 2.4 million in fund balance, and that went down to 1.6 million at the end of the year. So we purchased more equipment than we had new cash for. So we had to use reserves. In the insurance fund, we lost about $90,000. And then in the employee benefit fund, we gained about $28,000. So that is our health insurance. We have, and we've talked about this before, some lingering concerns about the viability of the motor pool. So we had reserves of 1.6 when we started 2021. If we expect about 1.3 million in cash profits, and if you recall, we had $1 million for the fire trucks, but we are spending about 1.8 in DPW, 2.2 in fire, and about 21,000 in police. We're projecting at the end of the year we'll actually have now a negative surplus in the motor pool of just about 166,000. So if we carry that forward to 2022, again, go through the math of adding our profits for the year and then subtracting the purchases that are, planned, will be about a $900,000 deficit at the end of 2022. So there's a couple of options that we have. Certainly we are looking and we are evaluating right now to do a study on the rates that we charge the departments so that we could increase those rates. The other thing, that I think might be a wise consideration is for the Finance Committee to recommend to council to transfer about $900,000 out of the general fund into the motor pool to, eliminate this deficit. As I pointed out, over the last 5 years, we've increased the general fund balance over $5 million, so it definitely could afford a one-time transfer. When we look at the motor pool study, when Mercury was here, they definitely, I think, did a good job of explaining the importance of keeping our equipment up to date, because when our equipment is not up to date, it costs more money to maintain it and to fuel it. And we have been struggling with shortages of mechanics, so it, creates complication with actually being able to staff the maintenance of that equipment, which then we send more out. So that is something that I did put on the agenda, if that would be something that you would want to consider, is transferring those funds into the motor pool.
Mary Ann, I
Yeah.
had a question about, I guess the survey, under what committee will that be discussed, about looking at the motor pool?
The Mercury study?
Well, we did that under
SISM.
SISM, but I guess in another survey about how the vehicles are used, I guess it just happens today, one of the city pickup trucks was parked near my house for over an hour with the engine running, and they didn't move, and the driver was in the driver's seat. And I understand, you do have like a laptop, and that they were looking at the alleys, so to determine if there was anything in the city right away. But at a certain point, keeping your car running for an hour when you're on your laptop, you're increasing all this gasoline usage. And at a certain point in this study, where I don't know what committee will be looking at it, is there a certain point, like even for me when I'm in drive up, I shut the engine off. So not to waste gas while waiting in line or for extended periods of time. And it could overall, if you look at the whole fleet, save us thousands of dollars on gasoline. I mean, I understand you're going ahead and using it by hours of use or whatever, but maybe in this survey, we should be looking at more detail. If you're just going to be in a certain spot for a period of time, shut the car off. You can use the battery if you need to for the laptop.
Yeah, the intention, once we determine what kind of study and the cost, we'll bring it back to finance for
Yeah,
consideration.
I think if it has to do with rates and what we charge other departments, it should happen here. Yep.
And just a kind of a high-level review of the wastewater and water utility. You can see we did some rate increases. Water utility is a little bit tighter managed because of the PSC, but you can see that our profit or net growth in our net position was 3.2 million in the wastewater and 1.4 million in the water utility, versus small changes in 2019, only 500,000 for the water, or for the sewer, and 175 for water. And so some of that, the rates were supposed to take care of retirement of the debt. So our debt requirements are going to change, in the near future, because our first principal payments for the clean water and safe drinking water aren't until May of 2023, but we are paying interest May 1 and November 1
Sure.
annually. And then we have the other outstanding debt for the utility. And then Metro Ride actually had a profit in 2020 of $640,000 due to their additional COVID money from the state. The parking fund lost 194. And airport lost 145. The majority of that, you can see 129,000 of that is depreciation. So again, it's not a cash loss, it's mainly depreciation. Oh, go ahead.
A few of these slides aren't in the packet.
I know, I accidentally had them hidden.
Okay.
You know, like you can mark your PowerPoint where you hide the slide, and it was left over from when I did my joint review board presentation. I apologize for that.
No, that's no problem.
I did one last check, and I'm like, oh, no, I had them in them. And then, just to remind you that we do hold funds for others. So our cemetery trust had about 740,000, Main Street 97, Wausau Events 228, and the Entrepreneurial Center 84,000. And that's it.
Okay. All right. Questions about the PowerPoint?
And then the auditor will be coming the last meeting in September, just to meet with you.
Okay, sounds good.
Lisa, I have a question.
Go
Are
ahead.
we charging any type of fees to the Wausau events and,
We
At all.
don't today, no. For accounting services,
yes?
no, we don't, we do not.
I think that's something we need to look at, and in the future, there is a cost involved in that. All right, thank you.
All right. Okay, and so that takes us then to item number 4, which Mary Ann just briefly touched on, which is discussion and possible action regarding the transfer of the 2020 financial surplus to the motor pool fund. And so we will need to decide if we want to take some of that surplus or all of it and shore up the motor pool fund to get them to a positive position for this year. And so you're looking at probably about 900,000.
Right,
Right.
that would be my recommendation, 900,000 as a one-time transfer. You know, when you, again, when they look at ways to use transfers, this would be a one-time transfer. If you recall, one of the reasons we had the profit is because it was a mild winter
Yep.
and motor pool didn't get all of the revenues it typically would have gotten on a, you know, a busier winter year. And, you know, we'd be under no obligation to do a recurring transfer. It's really basically funding that last bit of that fire truck. And then if we're proactive in looking at our rates going forward, you know, in my mind, if we can get that study done, we can make some provisions for increases in the rates in the 2022 budget and step into them over time for affordability. But like I said, we really have will have gotten past that peak in the motor pool because of the fire rigs being replaced, the 3 rigs.
Well, and it's kind of gotten to the point where we kind of need a rapid course correction there.
Yes.
Now, with regard to the total surplus, we were looking at 1.5, right? For, was that where you were at for 2020? On the,
It was $1,041,000.
$1,041,000, okay.
Yeah.
And so the other concern that I have is that for a number of years, we have intentionally not ramped up contingency.
Right.
And so if we are, if we have an extra, if we have 100,000 left of that surplus after the $900,000 transfer, would it be prudent for us to put the rest of it into contingency? Because it's been a lot of years since we spent down a bunch of that for some unexpected things, like 5 years ago.
You could certainly do that.
I mean, that's something I mean, that really is our emergency fund for unforeseen, unexpected things. So, you know, you don't know when you're going to have a, you know, major infrastructure project that you didn't plan for that, you know, drains the resources out of the departmental budget. So, Sarah, go ahead.
Is there any, like, thresholds that that contingency fund can get to? Like a certain percentage of our budgets or revenues?
No.
Okay, so, like, it got up to like 500,000, what, a decade or so ago? I mean, is that sort of the typical amount that it's been at?
Yeah, I think back when we had more union contracts, you know, the contracts didn't always settle and it was hard to predict because they could go to arbitration. And so in those situations, the contingency was helpful for managing arbitrations that didn't, you know, end the way we thought they were, you know, the way that we had predicted. And I think, you know, I don't know, but you know, you used contingency to make estimates for payroll changes so that it wasn't necessarily evident to the negotiating teams of what you were thinking you were going to pay out. I don't know. So I think that's why we used contingency much more back in the day when I first started because of those types of situations.
Well, and I think when we went from 500 to 160, or at least in a couple of steps, didn't we also use that for some unexpected infrastructure projects that came along? Like, I thought at one point a sinkhole opened up
Oh,
at
yeah, we
17th
might
and
have.
Sherman, and we ended up paying for that out of contingency. And that's the thing, you don't know when that's going to happen again. You don't know when the next report's going to come from, you know, or where. And I've always felt like maybe 500 was too high, but I would feel better if we were sitting with at least $250,000 in there, because if that happens, and then we have to scramble to find it, we're in a worse position. So, Sarah?
And there, I mean, so Marianne, what would you recommend? I mean, do you think $250,000 is plenty?
Yeah,
Or,
I think
you
that
know,
would be a good spot to be in,
Okay.
yes.
So if we put 100 in, we'd be right around there. We'd be like 263-ish.
Yep.
You know, we'd be, I guess, better prepared for the unforeseen. You know, and the fact that we were not able to, in a number of budgets, add anything to it for the last 5 was tough for us to do, but we weren't able to infuse it with anything. So, Deb?
Thank you, Lisa. I was just going to say with, I guess the more details we learn about the Biden administration money that's supposed to be used for water or sewer, to the point of, was it 14, 15 million, and that we've already received cash for half of it, I would think a portion of that could be used for contingency in those areas, especially in the next 3 years when we need to spend it down or lose it. So I guess because of timing-wise, SISM, which is about street maintenance and capital projects, is meeting tomorrow. And I know a number of the committee members are very concerned about the road conditions throughout the city. And I do feel that once we have a clarification on of how we can use the Biden funds, we could cover the water and the sewer and see what it would be to put a new skim coat on some of the roads in the area that are in bad condition, because we have so many roads that are in poor condition.
Now, are you talking about the American Rescue Plan funds? Because those cannot be used for streets. The ARPA funds, the one that we've received money for already,
Yes.
cannot be used for streets. The only funding that we could put into streets is the infrastructure bill that has not yet cleared in Washington. It passed in the House, but not the Senate.
But I thought the Biden ARCA funds were for water and sewer.
Water and sewer is separate. So if you're using our sinkhole example, I don't believe that it would be acceptable for us to hold a reserve in contingency as opposed to a spend down. We have to have a real project to do. So, you know, if we hadn't yet borrowed for the water or sewer plant project and you wanted to offset some of that debt or, you know, offer grants for lead laterals or whatever, I think those are options. But we can't just take it and, you know, sock it away in a emergency fund for sinkhole failures or something like that. They don't let us hold it like that, right? So,
You cannot put it into reserves.
Okay. But at this point, we just have it being invested, and that if we do run into the issue of an emergency, we can use those funds. And I think we should get that clarification from Washington on that in writing. So,
Sarah?
so, or was Alder Ryan sort of saying the surplus, the 100,000 we're thinking of going into the contingency should go to fixing our current roadways? So instead of putting in contingency, you might use it now?
Okay, but the construction season is ending, and the projects that we have on the docket are all bid and hired out.
I'm
So-
talking about what we can do in-house. Eric, can you explain that? We do have a machine that can do an additional coat for blacktopping that's done by city staff and city equipment, isn't that correct?
But we lose the blacktop plant in 2 months. It's gone.
Well,
Correct, and we still have money remaining that we're doing certain streets and certain areas with. So it would be, you know, if there is more money to put into, you know, our hot mix budget, because that's really where that comes out of. It's a matter of us being able to spend it. And so, yeah, typically the hot mix plants will close early November. And then depending on what we have scheduled already, maybe already be taken. And I'm not exactly sure where we're at with those budgets right now, Deb, or our work plan right now, so.
well, do you think you'll have additional information when we have our SISM meeting tomorrow then? Or-
I can ask where we're at.
Okay.
On that, and I can provide an update. Yep.
Right.
I guess I'm on SISM, as well as Lisa with the other brothers we have here on the council. So I do think we need to be looking at how we can make more improvements to the roads. And I'm not necessarily saying contractors, I'm saying city equipment and staff and hot mix. Thank you.
but they're also short, last I heard, they're short equipment operators, they're short mechanics. And I think they're struggling to figure out how they're gonna keep up with the plow routes if we have a bad winter. So there may not be people to do it with. Is that where you're at with?
It is. We're 3 or 4 people short, moving into winter, trying to get, some things put together. I think, some of these things, we have a laundry list that we maintain, on where we want to work. And we do get, you have given us additional money this year with the budget modification. And so, if it isn't this year, because it's a pretty tight schedule right now, but, planning into the future to increase that hot mix budget is kind of on our docket and has been for a couple of years, so for the next couple of years, if we can keep ramping that up and get started earlier in the year, will help us and, on our change of operations, so.
Then I guess I still would recommend we use it towards the street, the balance
Well,
then.
We've been through our through our budget workshop process, we've been ramping up the street repair budget anyway, notwithstanding any surplus, by, was it almost 300,000 a year?
We did on the seal coating, that's what was our focus.
Right.
We kind of shifted that a couple of years ago because we were advancing, I think, $50,000 a year into that to budget every year, and taking some of those savings at the end of the year to help offset that. Now we kind of switched from our strategy of crack sealing and doing some of that in-house, contracting that out and doing the hot mix with the new paver and stuff is what you're talking about now. And over the last 2 years, we've been, trying to increase that budget and trying to get more of that work done, because I think the residents appreciate it.
For
And
sure.
a lot of these streets are,
So if we
in
wanted to
poor
infuse that
condition.
fund, we would have to then do a modification and then carry a carryover, right, basically?
Right.
Because they can't get the work done in '21. So
Right.
we'd have to basically earmark it and then carry it over for next year.
I
For
understand,
that.
but SISM meeting is tomorrow, and
Well, and we don't have time to amend that agenda. We're past 4 PM. So
I
any-
understand.
Yep.
I understand, but I'm saying it's part of what SISM has been looking at, a number of members and our residents complaining about our roads. So I do think when there is surplus available, if there's a way we can add to the hot mix and not be contracted out, the more roads we can get done, because we can't afford to do the big, open up the streets and the 100-year dig, that our residents are really concerned with the roads.
Right. I don't disagree with that. We've used that same ideology to not infuse the contingency fund for the last 6 years. So it's just a matter of how you guys feel, where your priorities are, because if we want to infuse that hot mix budget, we can do that. I mean, not under this agenda item, because right now we're agendized for motor pool. So if we do the motor pool infusion for the 900,000, at our next meeting, we could talk about the remainder of the surplus and figure out where we want to go with that. And by then, we can talk about that carryover too.
I guess I would recommend that, Lisa. I'm not necessarily saying let's spend it all today, but I do think timing-wise with SISM coming up and concerns by a number of committee members that we need to put more towards the hot mix. That's where we're going instead of, the tar repairs that aren't, or the small patches, which don't seem to be holding up, even some, by spring, after winter. So we could separate it, and I'm okay
We
about
can,
that.
and we could have that discussion at the October SISM, which gives them some time to prepare for it, because it's not on for tomorrow, but it can be for October. Sarah?
So I guess I would move to transfer $900,000 from our general fund balance into the motor pool fund.
Okay, excellent. We have a motion by Watson. Is there a second? Second by Herbst. Further discussion or questions? Hearing none. Members in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? None are opposed. That motion carries. And we're inching up on the start of public health and safety. So let's skip to item 6, because we need to knock that out for sure, which is discussion and possible action regarding replacement of public litter containers from Wausau Tile as a sole source purchase. And these would be the River District garbage containers, right, that they can empty with the truck? Oh, and we've got a photo of it up on the
Yes.
TV here.
Yep,
So they're similar to the old ones,
yes.
okay?
And I think, from our perspective, Re-Rig had, we had purchased the majority of the containers from Re-Rig the last time, and we had problems with the tops coming off, and they have not been very good at managing, coming through
Repairs?
with repairs. And so we weren't real inclined to go back to them. We paid Re-Rig $385 in 2016. The Wausau tile quote is $395. I did ask online for a quote. This was multiple weeks ago, and they, for a revised quote, just so I would have an actual new price, and no one has responded to me for, so I haven't gotten one.
Okay.
But I do feel like this price is very affordable, and obviously Wausau Tile is going to want to, provide us with a product that has a lasting power, and then also they created a standard color that would match our light fixtures downtown, so we're not paying an upcharge for a special color. So I think that is a really nice benefit, and it's a local vendor.
That was what I was going to say, is if they're even close in price and we can use a local vendor, that is always a plus for us, because that infuses our local economy as well. What are your thoughts, committee? Sarah, and then Deb.
And plus, it sounds like their customer service will be 150 times better, so.
Yes.
Can I move to approve this?
Sure.
One-time sole source purchase?
Yep, we have a motion from Watson to approve the purchase. Is there a second? Second by Herbst. Further discussion? Michael,
Just a
and then
quick
Deb.
question, yeah. What's the life expectancy of these trash containers? I mean, do they,
They had a 5-year guarantee, our existing ones did.
They probably made it just that, maybe.
Yeah.
and they've been, so they've been about 5 years old?
Yes.
Okay, so, yeah.
Okay. Deb, you
Okay.
had a question still?
I was going to ask Mary Ann that price is without freight charges as well, right?
Right, well, they've got an estimated shipping of $200. I would think that, because they are produced in the Wausau plant. So,
No, but I mean in regard to the other vendor.
Oh, the other vendor, the shipping was not included in the $385.
Okay, well,
Yeah.
you can't be 200 for the
Yeah.
number you're talking
Right?
about.
Yeah.
Right? So, yeah, I think we're on the right track. Any additional comments? If not, with a motion and a second on the floor to approve the purchase, members in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? None are opposed. That motion carries as well. We will hold the June 2021 financial report for our next meeting at month end, because that will keep. And we have a real short public health and safety meeting that needs to start here in about 2 minutes. So
I would move to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn from Watson, second from Herbst. Members in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Nobody ever is. We'll stand adjourned then. Thank you.